William was banged desperately on the side of the road, shouting for it to stop, but sadly it was already too late. What happened next will leave you in disbelief. But hey, before we dive into the story, do yourself a favor and pause the video right now. Go hit that like button and let's see if we can make this video reach 1,000 likes. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to your favorite story channel. Also make sure to ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the latest and weirdest stories. Trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming your way. Now sit back, relax, and prepare to be amazed as we take you on an unforgettable ride. Don't forget to engage with us in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Without further ado, let's dive right in. William Romero had been navigating the streets of Brooklyn in his wheelchair for years. It wasn't an easy task. New York's streets were known for their chaos, and for someone like him, a double amputee, every trip outside was a small battle against the city's infrastructure. The cracks in the sidewalks, the uneven curbs, the constant need to dodge both pedestrians and cars. It all required a level of vigilance that most people took for granted, but Romero was used to this life. He had adapted. He had no choice. On the morning of August 31st, Romero set out from his apartment, like he did every week, on his way to the hospital for his regular dialysis treatment. The journey had become a part of his routine, something he knew he had to endure to stay alive. He'd grown accustomed to the routine of boarding the bus, riding through the bustling streets of Brooklyn, and arriving at the hospital to sit through the hours-long procedure that kept his kidneys functioning. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was his, and he had learned to handle it with quiet dignity. The day was warm, the air heavy with humidity, and the sidewalks were crowded with people rushing to work, school, and appointments. Romero moved through the throngs of people, his electric wheelchair humming beneath him. The trip to the bus stop was one he'd made countless times before, and although the streets could be unpredictable, he always managed to find his way through. As he approached the bus stop, however, he noticed something was off. A large delivery truck was parked right in front of the curb where the bus was supposed to pull up. The truck, emblazoned with a local company's logo, had parked illegally, blocking access to the bus stop. Romero knew this wasn't an uncommon sight. New York streets were often clogged with delivery trucks, taxis, and parked cars. But this time, the obstacle posed a serious problem for him. When the bus arrived, it couldn't pull up to the curb as it normally would. Instead, it stopped in the middle of the street, its doors opening just a few feet away from the curb. For most people, this would have been a minor inconvenience, a slight stretch to reach the bus. But for Romero, it was much more than that. He needed a flat, stable surface to board the bus, especially in his wheelchair. The gap between the curb and the street suddenly felt like a chasm. Romero took a deep breath, assessing the situation. He had faced worse obstacles before. He began to roll his wheelchair forward, carefully maneuvering toward the bus. As he approached the curb, he felt the front wheels of his chair catch on the uneven edge of the sidewalk. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze, and then, with a violent jolt, his chair tipped forward. Time slowed as Romero was thrown out of his wheelchair, his body pitching forward onto the hard pavement. The impact was brutal, the rough asphalt tearing at his skin as he hit the ground. His wheelchair toppled over beside him, its metal frame clattering loudly. Pain shot through his body, but more than that, there was a sense of shock. He had fallen before, but this was different. This was public. This was humiliating. For a moment, Romero lay on the ground, dazed. The world around him continued to move at its usual frenetic pace. Cars zoomed by on the street. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalk, some glancing his way, but most oblivious to the man who had just been thrown from his wheelchair. And then the bus doors closed. Romero watched in disbelief as the bus, which had stopped to pick him up, now began to pull away. The driver, who had clearly seen him fall, showed no intention of helping. The engine roared to life and the bus lurched forward, leaving Romero lying helpless in the middle of the road. It was as if he didn't exist, as if his presence there, sprawled on the asphalt, didn't matter at all. A man who had been sitting in the very truck that had blocked the bus stop suddenly sprang into action. He leapt out of the truck, running toward the bus, shouting and waving his arms. He banged on the side of the bus, trying to get the driver's attention, but it was no use. The bus continued down the street, disappearing into the distance. Romero's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He wasn't just hurt physically. There was a deeper wound, one that cut to the core of his humanity. How could someone leave him like this? How could a bus driver, whose job was to serve the public, turn a blind eye to a man in a wheelchair lying on the ground? The man from the truck reached him and knelt down beside him, his face a mixture of guilt and concern. "I'm so sorry," the man kept repeating, his voice thick with remorse. "I shouldn't have parked there. I didn't know." He trailed off, unsure of what to say. Romero, still stunned from the fall, could barely muster a response. He knew the man meant well, but his apology felt like too little, too late. The damage had already been done. The man helped Romero back into his wheelchair, carefully lifting him off the ground and setting him upright. As he did, Romero winced, the pain in his arms and shoulders flaring up. But the physical pain wasn't what bothered him the most. It was the sense of being abandoned, discarded like he didn't matter. "I'm not a pigeon or a dog you just leave on the floor," Romero said, his voice filled with frustration and disbelief. "It's his responsibility. He's supposed to take me up on the bus and lock me inside." The man nodded, clearly at a loss for words. He knew Romero was right. The bus driver had failed in his duty. But there was nothing he could do now. The bus was long gone, and Romero was left to deal with the aftermath. As the shock began to wear off, Romero's mind turned to the events that had led up to the fall. The truck, parked illegally at the bus stop, had set off a chain reaction that culminated in his being thrown from his wheelchair. He looked at the man from the truck, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and exhaustion. "The truck is not supposed to park here," Romero said, his voice steady but firm. "This is for handicapped people." The man nodded again, his face flushed with guilt. I know, I shouldn't have parked here. I'm so sorry, man." But sorry wasn't enough. Romero knew that this wasn't just about a single truck or a single bus driver. This was about the larger issue of how people with disabilities were treated in the city. New York was supposed to be a place of opportunity, a place where everyone could get where they needed to go. But for Romero and others like him, the city often felt like an obstacle course designed to trip them up at every turn. The bus driver's indifference wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a broader problem. Public transportation, which was supposed to be accessible to all, was often anything but. Wheelchair ramps malfunctioned, elevators in subway stations were frequently out of service, and drivers like the one who had just left him on the street didn't always bother to help. Romero had experienced these frustrations countless times before, but this was something else. This was personal. As the day wore on, Romero's story began to spread. The incident had been caught on a neighbor's security camera, and soon news outlets like ABC7 were picking up the footage. The grainy video showed Romero's wheelchair tipping over, the bus pulling away, and the man from the truck running to help. It was a shocking image, one that quickly ignited outrage in the community. For the MTA, the footage was an embarrassment. The bus driver's actions, or lack thereof, were indefensible. The driver was quickly taken out of service, pending an investigation, but the damage had already been done. In an official statement, MTA spokesperson Amanda Valdez acknowledged the failure, saying, "This was an unfortunate situation for a customer who would have been able to safely board the bus had a truck not been illegally parked blocking the bus stop. We are thankful he was not seriously injured." Romero read the statement with a bitter taste in his mouth. It was too easy to blame the truck, to brush off the bus driver's responsibility with a vague apology. "A person in my condition, how do you leave them on the floor?" Romero asked, his voice cracking with emotion. The question hung in the air, not just for the bus driver, but for the entire city. How could this happen in a place that prided itself on being modern, progressive, and inclusive? In the days that followed, Romero's story gained traction, drawing attention from disability rights advocates and local politicians alike. The footage of his fall became a rallying cry for better treatment of people with disabilities in New York City. Advocates pointed out that Romero's experience was far from unique. Many wheelchair users faced similar challenges every day, from inaccessible buses to broken-down elevators in subway stations. The city had made strides in recent years, but there was still a long way to go. Local organizations rallied around Romero, offering their support and calling for stricter enforcement of parking violations near bus stops. The MTA announced plans to expand its camera enforcement, with fines of up to $250 for vehicles blocking bus stops. It was a small victory, but for Romero, it felt like a step in the right direction. Still, the incident had left its mark. For Romero, the fall wasn't just a physical injury, it was a reminder of how vulnerable he could be in a city that wasn't always built to accommodate him. He had spent years fighting for his independence, learning to navigate the streets in his wheelchair, mastering the public transportation system that often seemed more like an obstacle than a service. But on that day, he had been left behind, discarded like he didn't matter. As the investigation into the bus driver's actions continued, Romero remained hopeful that his story would lead to real change. He knew that what had happened to him was a symptom of a larger problem, one that couldn't be fixed with a single apology or a fine. It would take a fundamental shift in how the city viewed and treated its disabled residents. In the weeks that followed, Romero became a vocal advocate for disability rights, using his platform to raise awareness about the challenges faced by people like him. His story, once a source of pain and frustration, had become a symbol of resilience and the fight for justice. And while the road ahead was still long, Romero knew that he wasn't alone. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about a single incident on a Brooklyn street. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to be seen, not as a burden, but as a human being deserving of care and compassion. And that was a fight worth fighting.